All right, let's talk a little bit about the charges. We brushed by this campaign finance alleged violation. That's the underlying felony that somehow erases the 2-year statute of limitations on the misdemeanor of cooking your books. So cooking the books, writing the wrong thing down for this payment. He called it a legal expense to Michael Cohen, when in fact it was a payment to Stormy. They couldn't have brought that. It was a 2-year statute of limitations. It expired, and this underlying campaign finance violation is the reason they were able to resurrect it. Because you mess with your books to cover up a felony. That was a felony. You guys have both mentioned it. I want to play it for the audience. We had former FEC, Federal Election Commission official Brad Smith on the show, appointed by Bill Clinton. All right, appointed by a Dem who served for many years, talking about what would make it a campaign finance violation and what wouldn't. It's very hard. It's very, very hard to show. Here's a little bit of that from April 5th. It was episode 522. Watch.
Let's suppose I decide to run for Congress and I say, I need to be in a debate and I need a really good suit. So I go out and I spend, $2,000 on a suit, which I would never otherwise do, right? It doesn't make it a campaign expense, even though my purpose was to do it to influence the election. Or suppose I'm an individual and I have a messy divorce in my background and I decide I'm going to run for office. And I say to my lawyer, can we seal those records? And I pay my lawyer to try to seal those divorce records. Even though I'm doing it for the purpose of influencing a campaign, it's not a campaign expenditure.
And he went on to explain, guys, that under the relevant laws, it has to be a payment that could only ever be to support your campaign. So a suit wouldn't work, burying bad info on the internet wouldn't work, and paying off a lover not to go public with your extramarital affair wouldn't work. That's from a guy who does this for a living. That's why this thing shouldn't be here at all. But Alan, that should have been dealt with on the papers, right? Like that's never good. That argument doesn't go to the jury.
No, I agree with you. The judge ruled essentially that the jury could conceivably find that it was the only purpose. Under this theory, Alexander Hamilton would have gone to jail for paying hush money to prevent his affair, adulterous affair. Both he was married and the woman was married. And there was an allegation that he used Treasury money to pay it. And eventually, initially he denied it. Certainly he didn't put it on any forms. Eventually, he was forced by Jefferson's cronies to write a book, a little pamphlet, which I actually own, in which he admits the affair, but never in the history of the United States, and I would submit never in the history of the world, has anybody ever been prosecuted for failing to disclose hush money. As you said, I said from the beginning, why would anybody pay a nickel in hush money if they knew they had an obligation immediately to disclose it? It's not hush money if you have to disclose it. This is the most absurd case, and I would think a good jury could appeal to the common sense of at least one juror and say, would you ever pay hush money if you knew it would be exposed? And, the idea that you can prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the only purpose that he did this payment, the only purpose was to influence the election, is to expect proof of something that's just impossible ever to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. I agree with you. This case would have been dismissed, should have been dismissed by a decent judge. But look, what judge wouldn't want to be every day in the press? One other point I want to make. It's an outrage that this case is not on television. The first case involving a criminal prosecution, a weak case. Why are we not entitled to see how bad this case is on television? Why do we have to listen to an analysis of it by CNN, MSNBC, and the New York Times? In the OJ case, there was a poll that was done. People who actually saw the case on television every day were not surprised at the verdict. It's people who read about it from the New York Times or from Tubin, on CNN, who read about it or heard about it through biased reporting that were absolutely shocked at the result. For example, they didn't report on the fact that a sock had been tampered with and blood had been poured on it by Officer Van Adder because they didn't want the public to know that. And if you didn't see it with your own eyes, you would say, oh my God, how could these jurors have acquitted? But when you saw it, you would then understand why jurors after 4 or 5 of them afterward, said, we didn't think he was innocent. We thought the police tampered with the evidence and we couldn't trust the evidence. That's why we acquitted. That's why this case should be on television. It's an absolute outrage, a violation of all of our rights, not to see every moment of this case, not to see the judge on trial, the prosecutor on trial, as well as the defendant on trial.
Yeah. At a minimum, they could release the audio the way the Supreme Court does on the big cases. There's no body that hates cameras more than the U.S. Supreme Court. They hate the media, and they have no obligation to give us anything. But even on the big cases, they release the audio, understanding that they're ultimately public servants. They work for us, right, as does Judge Merchan. And, we have a very high public interest in this case for all the obvious reasons. Continuing forward with the actual charges, Josh. So we talked about the underlying campaign finance violation that got us, a resurrection of the expired "you cooked your books" allegation. Now, we're going to spend most of this trial neck deep in R-rated material, right? It's going to be a parade of witnesses we expect that are rather unsavory, from Michael Cohen, who is a convicted felon. He was Trump's longtime lawyer who paid Stormy Daniels this $130,000. To Stormy Daniels herself, we think, porn star. There's a former Playmate of the Year, 1998, Karen McDougal, with whom Trump allegedly had an affair, who also was paid off to keep her silence. She was part of the AMI/National Enquirer catch and kill scheme, which I do want to talk to you about. Some interesting developments there. But I'm just going to give you this first, because Stormy Daniels talked a little bit about whether she expects to be a witness when she went on The View, promoting the documentary about her. She's everywhere, but Trump can't say anything about her in SOP 40. Listen to this.
I'm absolutely ready. I've been ready. I'm hoping with all of my heart that they call me. I don't need someone to speak for me. Mm-hmm. And I relish the day that I get to face him and speak my truth.
Okay. She's going to speak her truth. Josh, she's going to go on and speak it. And that's what's interesting to me is I don't even know if it's necessary, right? It's maybe Stormy, but do we really need to go down the rabbit hole of potentially the Trump Tower doorman, who apparently made up out of whole cloth the allegation that Trump had a love child in Trump Tower with one of the employees there, he was proven later to be, full of lies. Anyway, that's what the people at home are going to see. And you tell me, but I think it's by design. Those Republican women who used to vote GOP, who don't like Trump, they're going to have 6 to 8 weeks of R to X rated material around President Trump to talk about at the dinner table each night. And I do think it's all by design.
So it's a very interesting hypothesis, Megyn. I guess what I would say to that is that if that were really their goal, they probably would militate in favor of what Professor Dershowitz is saying and actually televising it all. Because if you really want to kind of instill into the minds of the suburban voters that Donald Trump is a misogynist, he's so terrible to women, look at him, he's sleeping with these porn stars, then you might actually want to see the porn stars and when they sound like the way Stormy Daniels just sounded in that View clip, which is to say,
contraire. When you see Stormy Daniels or hear her and you see Michael Cohen, you have the opposite reaction. It's much better for them to have Nicole Wallace, cleansing it, basically whitewashing the testimony as, she was like Mother Teresa up there with her allegations against Trump. Keep going.
No, fair enough. Point well taken. So, look, that definitely might be part of the Democratic calculus. Obviously, all of this amounts, and again, I'm zooming out a little bit here and focusing on the broader picture. A lot of this does amount just to straight up election interference. That is the term that a lot of the Trump campaign is using. I think that they're on very solid ground for doing so. Again, this underlying charge, we can't emphasize this point enough. Both Alan and I have made this point. Both the SDNY and Alvin Bragg's predecessor, Cy Vance Jr., looked into these charges and dismissed it because it was too frivolous.
There are some common sense reasons gold is pushing to all-time highs right now. The cost of goods continues to rise, for one, you know that. The national debt continues to skyrocket, above $34 trillion now, causing many to worry about when this house of cards is going to come crashing down and on whom. And then there's our presidential election year. That's going to have massive implications on the future of this country. All of this can add up to instability and uncertainty. And that's why many Americans are turning to Birch Gold Group. Have you diversified your savings yet? One option you could consider is to secure a portion of your savings with gold from Birch Gold. Text MK to 989898 and get your free information kit. You'll learn how to convert an existing IRA or 401k into a tax-sheltered IRA in gold without costing you anything. Birch Gold has an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau and thousands of happy customers. Just text MK to 989898 to claim your free info kit and learn how you might protect your savings from uncertainty today. Hey, thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.